Have you ever spent an entire day, or I don't know, maybe even a whole weekend, just agonizing over a weirdly worded email from a colleague?
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone has done that at least once.
Right. You know the exact scenario. You read it, you reread it, and you just think, wait, was that a dig at me?
Yeah, or it happens in person.
Yeah.
Like a perceived slight in a meeting. Someone talks over you, and suddenly your heart rate spikes, your face flushes, and you are absolutely convinced they did it on purpose to undermine you.
Yes, exactly. And clinical psychologist Anna Braverman argues in a really fascinating Psychology Today article that what you are experiencing in those moments isn't actually righteous anger. It's an allergic reaction.
Which is such a brilliant way to frame it.
It really is. So
Yeah.
today we're taking a deep dive into why your psychological immune system is essentially attacking you, how this reflex actively sabotages your career, and, how to rewire your brain to handle these ambiguous situations better.
Because framing our interpersonal grievances as allergies, well, it completely shifts how we evaluate our own reactions.
Okay, let's unpack this because the allergy metaphor is the core of this whole thing.
It is, yeah. It's a highly effective framework because it separates the physiological reaction from, like, moral judgment. To understand a psychological allergy, we first have to look at what a healthy psychological immune system actually does.
Right, because we need an immune system.
Exactly. Biologically, your body needs a robust defense system. When a genuine threat, like a dangerous bacteria, enters your bloodstream, your immune system initiates a fierce response to destroy it. Psychologically, taking offense operates on the exact same principle.
So getting mad is actually a good thing sometimes.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It is an extension of a healthy sense of self-worth and justice. If someone is intentionally manipulating you or crossing a hard boundary or actively disrespecting you, becoming angry is just your psychological immune system doing its job.
Right. It mobilizes your energy to fight off a real threat.
Precisely. But the problem arises when the immune system loses its ability to distinguish between a deadly virus and, say, a grain of pollen.
Okay, so a biological allergy is essentially an overprotective defense mechanism. Your body encounters something totally harmless, like pet dander, and just sounds the alarms as if your life is in danger. You sneeze, your eyes swell, you feel completely exhausted.
In our mental lives, being easily offended relies on that identical mechanism. It's an oversensitized threat detection system.
So, like, overreacting to small things.
Exactly. You encounter a minor or entirely ambiguous behavior, maybe a delayed text message or a blunt tone in a meeting, and your amygdala just triggers a full fight-or-flight response. Your brain is essentially treating an unreturned hello like a predator hiding in the bushes.
Wow. I mean, that state of hypervigilance has to carry a massive cognitive cost. The article brings up the concept of the EpiPen, which I think really highlights the day-to-day burden of living like this.
Yeah, the EpiPen analogy is so spot on.
Right, because if you have severe physical allergies, you can't just casually grab a cookie at a networking event. You're interrogating the caterer, you're checking labels, you're carrying an EpiPen. You have to expend a massive amount of energy just to navigate a standard environment.
And the psychological equivalent is just as exhausting. If you are prone to taking offense, you are spending your cognitive resources bracing for impact all day. You're analyzing the subtext of a two-word Slack message.
Right, like why did they use a period instead of an exclamation point?
Exactly. A psychological EpiPen might look like spending 2 hours venting to your partner about a colleague's tone or drafting and deleting 5 passive-aggressive email replies before finally sending one.
That sounds miserable.
It is. Because you are constantly mounting these defensive responses to minor stimuli, you basically live in a baseline state of arousal and suspicion.
Which introduces a pretty dangerous blind spot, I would think. If you have severe seasonal allergies, you feel awful all year. You might actually contract a serious sinus infection and completely ignore it, assuming it's just the pollen count.
Yes, that is the real danger.
So, if getting offended is an allergic reaction, are we basically turning ambiguous social interactions into psychological pollen? Does treating everything as a threat actually weaken our social immune system?
What's fascinating here is the cascading effect of that constant inflammation. By treating everyday ambiguity as psychological pollen, you completely deplete the emotional reserves you need for actual boundary enforcement.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. When a genuine toxic conflict arises, you might lack the clarity to identify it or the energy to handle it effectively, all because your system is already burnt out from fighting off harmless misunderstandings.
Okay, so if our brains are hardwired for this kind of threat detection, we have to ask why some people seem totally immune to the exact same social pollen.
That's the big question.
Because two people can sit in the same meeting, hear the exact same blunt feedback from a boss, and one person is absolutely devastated while the other just brushes it off before lunch. The article breaks this disparity down into four underlying psychological triggers.
Yeah, and the first trigger relates to your base rate assumptions about humanity.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It's about your underlying belief. Do you believe people are fundamentally good and well-intentioned, or do you believe they are inherently selfish and competitive? If your baseline assumption is positive, you naturally give people grace.
So when a colleague acts brusquely, your brain automatically categorizes it as an anomaly or like an accident rather than a calculated attack.
Exactly. You assume they're just having a bad day.
But even if you assume people are generally good, you still have to process the bad behavior right in front of you, which leads to the second trigger: how our brains assign blame. The piece discusses locus of control and attribution theory.
Right. Specifically, the difference between blaming internal motives versus external environments. This is deeply tied to something called the fundamental attribution error.
Fundamental attribution error. Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So when we make a mistake, we blame our environment. Like, I snapped at you because I didn't sleep well. We attribute it to external factors.
Yeah.
But when someone else snaps at us, we default to internal attribution.
We tell ourselves they snapped at us because they are a fundamentally disrespectful person.
Exactly. Someone who is easily offended relies heavily on internal attributions for other people's behavior. If a coworker walks past your desk without saying hello, the easily offended mind decides, oh, he wanted to ignore me to assert dominance.
When the much more likely external explanation is just that the office is noisy and he was mentally rehearsing a presentation or something. We project malicious intent onto simple distraction.
Precisely. We construct a narrative where we are the focal point of their actions.
Okay, so the third factor deals with confidence and self-efficacy, and I'm trying to square the author's logic with reality here.
How so?
Well, the premise is that people who are highly confident in their ability to defend against real harm are the ones who easily let go of minor slights. But doesn't ignoring a minor slight just look like passivity to an aggressor? Like if someone steps on your toes and you say nothing, aren't you just inviting them to do it again?
That's a common fear.
Huh.
But it looks like passivity only if you equate boundary enforcement with constant reactivity. True confidence is rooted in internal security, not external policing.
Meaning what exactly?
A person with high self-efficacy knows, without a doubt, that if a situation escalates to actual harm, they possess the tools and the courage to stop it.
Yeah.
Because they have that internal guarantee, they don't feel the need to prove their strength during every minor ambiguous interaction.
I see. So if you know you have a sword, you don't need to pull it out every time a leaf falls on you.
That is a perfect visualization. The person who feels deeply insecure about their ability to handle a real conflict is usually the one aggressively policing minor interactions.
They're overcompensating.
Exactly. They are trying to establish a perimeter of safety through hypervigilance because they don't trust their own ability to fight a battle up close.
Which flows right into the fourth trigger: the tension between defending your honor and focusing on practical outcomes. This one requires some untangling because defending your honor sounds inherently noble, you know.
It does sound noble, yes.
It implies high standards and self-respect. But the text frames it almost as a liability in professional settings, suggesting that prioritizing practical outcomes over your pride is the healthier strategy.
We have to view this through the lens of resource allocation. The article uses the environment of graduate school, but this really applies to any corporate or high-stakes setting.
Okay, give us an example.
Imagine your advisor or your manager returns a draft of a project covered in harshly worded, blunt criticism. If your primary drive is defending your honor, your immediate reaction is to take offense.
You might confront them about their tone or quietly withdraw and stop asking for their input just to protect your ego.
Right. But both of those reactions completely derail the actual goal, which is finishing the project.
So prioritizing honor gets in the way of the work.
Exactly. If your focus is on the practical outcome, like getting the paper published, securing the promotion, or just learning the skill, you process that harsh comment differently. You recognize the blunt tone as a minor, perhaps irritating obstacle, but you extract the useful feedback and discard the emotional packaging.
Wow. Prioritizing practical outcomes keeps you moving forward, whereas prioritizing honor often leaves you paralyzed in endless interpersonal skirmishes that do nothing to advance your goals.
That's exactly it.
But we aren't just reacting in a vacuum, though. These internal skirmishes inevitably bleed into our outward behavior. The real danger here isn't just a bruised ego, it's the real-world sabotage that follows.
The stakes are remarkably high.
Mm.
The way you interpret ambiguous moments dictates your subsequent actions, and those actions create tangible consequences.
Right.
The article outlines the ultimate danger of the easily offended mindset, which is the creation of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Let's trace the mechanics of how that prophecy actually fulfills itself. Take the really common scenario of giving a presentation you've worked on for weeks, and you look up to see two colleagues whispering to each other.
Okay, so if you mount an allergic response to that whispering, you decide it is an intentional display of disrespect. Your threat detection system activates, and this immediately alters your physiology and your behavior.
Right, you get tense.
Exactly. You might cross your arms, your facial expressions harden, your tone toward those specific colleagues becomes clipped and formal. And humans are highly attuned to these subtle micro-expressions.
So you start giving them the cold shoulder to protect yourself from a perceived threat.
But look at what happens next. Those colleagues register your sudden hostility. They don't know why you're acting cold, they just know you are unpleasant to be around. Consequently, they stop inviting you to collaborate. They don't ask you to join the next big project.
And the tragedy is, they aren't excluding you because of whatever they were whispering about. They might have been whispering about a completely unrelated deadline. They are excluding you because of the hostile environment your defensive reaction created. Your attempt to protect yourself from isolation is the exact mechanism that isolates you.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, your career trajectory relies heavily on your friction tolerance.
Friction tolerance, I like that.
Opportunities are built on relationships, and every relationship generates occasional friction. The author points out a stark reality regarding recruitment and networking. If a recruiter is disorganized or a bit rude during an interview, you pull out of the process because you're offended, the person who let that friction slide is the one who gets the job.
Wow. So if your friction tolerance is 0, your opportunities will be 0.
That's the harsh reality of it.
Well, the good news is that unlike biological allergies, which we largely just have to manage with antihistamines, psychological allergies can be actively rewired. We aren't permanently stuck with a hypersensitive threat detector.
No, not at all. With intentional effort, you can actually recalibrate your amygdala's response to these ambiguous stimuli. You can build up an immunity to the social pollen.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we aren't just talking about long-term therapy goals here. The author provides a practical, immediate toolkit. It's a 3-step cognitive intervention you can use the moment you feel your chest tighten and the offense rising.
It requires overriding the emotional brain with the logical brain by asking 3 specific questions.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is this situation clear-cut? You have to force yourself to pause and evaluate the evidence. What is the actual statistical likelihood that this behavior was an intentional attack on you?
So this is where we battle that fundamental attribution error we talked about earlier.
Exactly. You intentionally generate alternative hypotheses. Could they be stressed? Did they misread my email? Is there a cultural or linguistic difference in how we communicate? By forcing the brain to look for external factors, you interrupt the automatic internal blame cycle.
But let's say we do that and the situation actually is clear-cut. There is no alternative explanation. They were undeniably rude or dismissive. How does the antidote handle a confirmed slight?
That brings you to the second question. How much harm was actually caused? We have to consciously calibrate our emotional response to the reality of the damage.
Okay, so matching the reaction to the crime.
Right. The author is careful to note that if the harm is severe, like if a colleague actively steals your credit or damages your reputation, intent no longer matters.
Yep.
Standing up for yourself in that scenario is the necessary, healthy immune response.
But if the harm is minimal, we have a choice.
Exactly. If the damage is just a bruised ego from a single harsh tone or rolled eye, it is almost always wiser to give them the benefit of the doubt and move on. You are making a strategic decision to conserve your energy for battles that actually impact your life.
That conservation of energy is crucial. But the third question in this toolkit is easily the most profound because it forces us to look inward. The final question to ask yourself is, did this trigger a vulnerability?
This step demands rigorous self-awareness. Very often, the intensity of our offense is wildly disproportionate to the action of the other person. We get furious, not because of what they did, but because their careless behavior accidentally struck a pre-existing bruise inside of our own psyche.
The article uses a brilliant example regarding a joke about food. Let's dig into the mechanics of that because it perfectly isolates how vulnerabilities manufacture offense.
Okay, so imagine you are at a team lunch and someone makes a slightly awkward, insinuative joke about the food being served.
Okay, setting the scene.
If you are a person who carries a deep internal vulnerability about your weight, or you have a history of struggling with diet and body image, that careless joke is going to land like a targeted missile. Your alarm bells ring and you feel profoundly offended.
But if a different colleague is sitting right next to you and they have absolutely zero insecurities regarding food or their body, they process the exact same auditory information differently.
Yes, completely differently.
They hear the joke, think, well, that was a tasteless thing to say, and they forget it happened 5 seconds later. No spike in heart rate, no rumination.
The offense did not live in the joke itself. The offense was generated by the chemical reaction between the careless comment and the listener's hidden vulnerability.
Oh, wow.
When you feel a surge of indignation, asking yourself, does this hurt because their behavior was objectively terrible or because it bumped into an insecurity I am already carrying? Yeah. Well, it completely reframes the moment.
It shifts the focus away from punishing their bad behavior and redirects it toward acknowledging your own need for healing.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for us navigating the modern workplace or our personal lives? If we distill these insights, the core takeaway is about reclaiming your energy and your agency.
Absolutely.
Getting angry when you are genuinely targeted or disrespected is vital. You need that psychological immune response to survive. But reacting to every ambiguous slight, treating every rushed interaction or awkward email as a personal attack is going to exhaust your cognitive resources, sabotage your professional networks, and derail your practical goals.
It's just not sustainable.
No, it isn't. You have the power to stop the self-fulfilling prophecy of isolation by just pausing, fact-checking your threat detection system, and interrogating your own vulnerabilities.
We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing how to manage our own psychological allergies when the world offends us.
Yeah.
But let's flip the mirror for a moment before we go.
Oh, I like this.
Think about the mechanics of that food joke we just discussed. If taking offense is so deeply tied to invisible internal bruises, how often are you the pollen triggering someone else's psychological allergy without even realizing it?
That is such a good question.
You might send a hasty text message while waiting in line for coffee, or let your mind wander during a Zoom call and completely unintentionally bump into someone else's deep-seated insecurity. Realizing how easily we can trigger others just by being careless or distracted should change how we view their reactions.
It really should.
How might extending the benefit of the doubt to your colleagues, the exact same grace you hope they extend to your unthinking moments, transform the way you communicate with them tomorrow?
That is a phenomenal thought to end on. Recognizing that the person offending us might just be as tired, distracted, and allergic as we are changes the whole game. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those hard questions, keep looking for the why behind the reactions, and above all, stay curious. We'll catch you next time.